Welcome to Draft Deeper, part of the No Ceilings NBA podcast feed. Yeah, if you're listening to Draft Deeper, you've been a veteran fan of the program. That sounds a little different, right? We're no longer on the Draft Deeper podcast feed. We're breaking ground. This is episode 1 on the No Ceilings NBA feed. If you've missed the big news and you've been under a little bit of a rock, we've all come together under one feed to make sure that we're providing you timely daily podcast content in one place. So it's much easier for you to find all the No Ceilings content as a fan. So I'm really excited about this move. The good news is nothing else is changing about the show other than where you can find it. You're still getting me. My producer, Kevin Black, is still along for the ride. Maxwell Baumbach is obviously still here. And Stephen Gillespie, this man's ready to rock and roll. He's coming off of a work promotion. He's riding high. I'm fresh off of a trip down to Atlanta, seeing the Overtime Elite program. Steven's going to be out there next week. Maxwell's joining us after what he said was a long day for him, but that nevertheless, talking about basketball also always gets us jazzed up. So, boys, we're ready to rock and roll tonight. Maxwell, how you doing, bud?
I'm doing good. I'm so excited to talk about these guys. Sleepers, like this is home to me.
This is your podcast. This is your time to shine, baby.
Yeah, I could not be more excited to dig into some of these guys. There's some little nuances, a couple of them need to clean up, but overall, just a really exciting group. And I'd be really surprised if a couple of these guys don't really end up popping and ending up, among top 60s, among the consensus of people that really follow the draft by the time the draft is here next year.
As Maxwell just alluded to, this is sicko Terry. This is draft sicko territory. This is top sleepers is how we've dubbed some of these guys for tonight's podcast. Steven, I know that we've usually used the term draft sicko to talk about Maxwell, but I got to be honest, buddy, you were really digging into a lot of film this summer when you were back and ready to rock and roll to prep for 2023. So I think you're going to be right at home on this podcast too. And I know for a fact, you're a big fan of some of these guys, at the very least on this side. I think you like the majority of them, but you're a big fan of some of these guys on this list. How are you doing, buddy? You ready to break down some of these names tonight?
Well, yeah. And so for the listeners, you're probably hearing my voice is a little hoarse. Nathan mentioned I got a work promotion. A lot of that had to do with me talking and yelling really loudly. So I'm not sick, but I am a draft sicko. And I am very much so excited to be a part of this episode. And working with Maxwell, man, has really just like ignited a passion about, like, I don't care to talk about Scoot Henderson or Victor Wembanyama. Like, I'll leave that to everybody else, man. I want to talk about these guys in particular. They're so much more fun because you feel better when these guys hit. Like, that some of the big guys are going to do great things and get drafted and stuff like that. But when you leave no stone unturned, right, Maxwell, and you start looking at some of these other names and they hit, like, you feel good. I was big on Santi Aldama in his draft. And what are we looking at now? And like, he's one of those sleeper prospects that I hit on. So I have an affinity for these guys. I'm excited to be on the show tonight, fellas.
And that's really that's why we're draft deeper, right? That's why we're living up to the moniker of making sure that we talk about everybody, not just the big names. Now, obviously, as this podcast goes on throughout the year, we wanted to be on Monday mornings. We wanted to be the first show in the rotation because Maxwell, Steven, and I, we kind of all write different weekly recap things for No Ceilings, right, in our own respective ways. So we kind of wanted to bring that content together and make sure that we're leading the week off for you as the audience with what happened last week. What are the big storylines we're following? Where are some of the sleeper prospects kind of boiling up? Where's the boiling point for some of these guys who not everybody's talking about yet, but all of a sudden they're going off for their respective teams, and we have to bring them to light as legitimate draft prospects. We want to bring you all the headlines, all the storylines. So that's the type of content you'll be getting from this episode in the feed once the season kicks off. But for now, we're still going through our 2023 NBA draft preview. So if you haven't listened to any of the prior episodes, they're not going anywhere, right? You can still find them on the previous Draft Deeper feed, but now moving forward, we're over here. We're cooking with gas on No Ceilings, baby. So let's get this podcast kicked off. Let's run through some of these names. And as I said, Maxwell, this is your time to shine. This is your show. I want you and Steven to be passionate about some of these guys tonight and really introduce yourselves more so to the No Ceilings NBA show audience. I know you guys joined the collective last year, to sort of in the middle of the season. So you guest hosted on some of these episodes. Like I know Steven, you were on the Draft Deck, and Maxwell, you were doing stuff with Corey and Albert as well as with the Tylers for a few episodes. But this is a great introduction for you guys to show people we're not just the Victor and Scoot show at No Ceilings. We go much deeper than that. So Maxwell, you wrote about the first player we're going to talk about tonight, Tucker DeVries out of Drake, the 6'7", 210-pound guard, played in 36 games last year, started in 29 of those games, 29.8 minutes per game, 13.9 points per game, 4.6 rebounds, and 2.1 assists in a first-year campaign, shot 42% from the field, 34% from three-point range, and 77.5% from the free throw line. 1 steal a game, 1.4 turnovers per game, a 20.7 PER. That's pretty good. And a near 54% true shooting percentage. So with some of these guys, we're going to bounce around, give some evaluations. And then similar to what we did last week, we'll talk about what's one thing that we really want to see from these guys in terms of how they can really pop into more major draft discussions around social media. But Maxwell, you have to give the audience the Tucker DeVries evaluation. So who is he?
Yeah.
What can people expect from him when they pop on his film for the first time?
So Tucker DeVries is where the modern NBA is headed, as far as guys that either start and play that fourth and fifth starter role or are your key contributors off your bench. He is tailor-made to be an NBA role player, a high-level NBA role player. The first thing I think that needs explaining with Tucker DeVries is he is big, he has very high feel, and he defends extremely well within a team concept. So he is 6'7", 210. He ran a lot of pick and roll for Drake last season. And when he does, he gets low with his dribble. He can sling one-handed passes. He's good with his offhand, his left hand. He's as comfortable dribbling with it as his right hand. And he likes to go left quite a bit, actually. And I think it's one of those things where he likes it because he can counter back to that right if it ever gets taken away from him. Very pure shooter. The 3-point percentage, let's start with that. The biggest thing that's going to have to just uptick with him is his overall efficiency. But I think he's a way better shooter than people realize. So he was 34% from three last season, but he took 6.1 per game. So he is launching when he's out there, and a lot of them are from way behind the 3-point line. He is taking deep threes from NBA range. He's hitting them. He's hitting them off of movement, off of screens. He is a true shooter. I have no doubt that we're going to see that 3-point percentage go up this season. And then the last thing is just defensively, he's hyper aware on the floor at all times. His level of just feel and competitiveness, he's always in the game. He's never going to get back cut. He's not going to lose his man trying to chase a steal or a block. And it's interesting when I talked to his dad, who's Drake's head coach for his piece. I wasn't just like, hey, I'm going to go interview this guy's dad. I talked to him because he's the head coach at Drake. But when I talked to him, he said like his favorite thing about his son as a player is the way he competes. Like there's just no place being taken off on the defensive end. And it kind of covers for some of his deficiencies a little bit. He's fantastic off the ball. On the ball is where he has work to do.
So that's one of my questions though. When we talk about things that I want to see, like I understand it's not the most important part of his game, but what position is he best to defend at the next level? Like I know he's a 6'7" guard. He isn't built pretty big. And I know that you talked about in your writing some improvements you want to see on the body. I'm sure you're going to get into that in a second, but what position do you think he's best to defend? Because normally that's how we categorize positions in the NBA. It's not, your role within the offense. It's who can you guard really defines your position.
Yeah, I think fours is who I would feel best with him guarding right now because he's pretty strong. Like he's strong around the basket. He's just not very quick. And that, to be fair, like again, his coach saying that's the biggest thing that he's worked on is his body, and he's going to have a completely different look this season. That remains to be seen. He looks better in the social media posts, whatever, but we got to see it on the court. But yeah, I think for now he's the guy who guards fours. I think so. The comparison a lot of people make is Jake LaRavia. And I think where that falls apart to me is the on-ball defense. Like I felt much better about Jake as an on-ball defender. I feel better about Tucker as far as his handle and like actually like driving to the basket with the ball. I think to me, the Tucker comparison is Vince Williams Jr. Like he's a guy who uses opponents' leverage against them, gets to the rim in the face of closeouts, really smart player. On the ball is like where he really needs to like loosen up, like in terms of his hips. Like Vince Williams also kind of stiff through his hips, doesn't react that well when guys turn the corner on him. And that to me is the big thing. Like I think he could do okay on like an NBA 4 for now. I think if he does get quicker and a little more fluid, he should be a guy who can guard 3s and 4s.
Steven, that must be music to your ears when you hear Maxwell use the name Vince Williams Jr. For as much as he was on that bandwagon, you were also very much driving that bandwagon. So do you see some of that comparison in Tucker's game? And for that reason, maybe that reason alone, maybe for other reasons, are you hopping on the Tuck train with Maxwell?
Yeah, I'm in on Tuck, man. I love him. I have a second round grade on him already. And I just want to see what he did in the offseason to improve his game. You know, Maxwell did a great job of talking about his competitiveness on the defensive end. I have here in my notes that he has active hands on defense and he gets into a really good stance too. Offensively, word for word in my notes, Maxwell is like he can drive left comfortably. So I love listening to you break that down in your analysis. And then the movement shooting is just, that's going to be his meal ticket to getting minutes early in the NBA, is that he could be a reliable space to floor shooter, but it's that ancillary playmaking that he can bring to the table, a la Vince Williams Jr. for his position too, was one of the best playmaking forwards in all of college basketball last year. I think that Tuck can do a lot of the same things. And Maxwell talked about like the NBA range on his 3-point shot and the consistency. Those are some of my concerns, right? Is the shot selection, because he is asked to do so much. Like how much do we, ding him for taking what we would ultimately consider bad shots?
Is that why you think the percentage is just under 42%? It's just more of the shot selection, not necessarily the touch or the strength or any of those other things?
Absolutely. He's asked to do so much for his team, and he's really the only offensive engine that could be trusted to get his own shot because of his ability and his size combination. And then Maxwell touched on it too. He's not what I would consider a plus athlete. I don't know if I would consider him a minus athlete necessarily, but he's not blowing anyone away in that department. So how much strength did he add? How much, quickness is he able to get by being in better shape? Like those are things that I'm looking at. And if he starts checking some of those boxes, like this could be an early second, late first round type of talent. I wouldn't be surprised about that at all.
No, I agree 100%. And I'm glad that Maxwell wanted to point him out along with the next name that we're going to talk about as well on our list, but specifically with Tucker. When you go and watch his film and you see, as Maxwell was talking about, the types of shots he was making, the deep range on his 3-ball, if he does uptick some of those percentages, if he finds ways to be more efficient inside the arc tour, he can get that percentage up to 45, 46% from the field. If he gets that 3-point percentage up to 37, 38, 39% on even better volume than what he was shooting last year. And you talked about it, Stephen, he already had a lot of responsibility. You would imagine going into another year, that's just going to keep improving on him or building up as far as a workload. So if he can handle that volume and still bring those percentages up, why wouldn't he pop on people's big boards? And I do think he's one of these mid-major prospects that people need to be talking about. So we're going to be bouncing back and forth between mid-majors, between non-Power 6 programs in these lists. We're going to talk about some Power 6 guys, but speaking of the Power 6, let's move to a freshman. What a freshman made the top sleepers list on this podcast. Yes, I could have probably thrown him in the under the radar freshman pod, but boys, we had so many names on that freaking list. Like we had to find ways to cut it down and move some guys around. And when talking about Judah Mintz, I'm going to go back to Maxwell because I knew that we were in our No Ceilings group chat and Maxwell's just messaging us like, why is nobody talking about Judah Mintz? And some of the other guys, they gave you a little bit of backlash on that.
Yeah.
But
yeah,
I thought that you explained yourself incredibly well as to what you specifically saw on the high school film and why we should be excited about the 6'3" guard. He's a freshman coming in, as I said. He went to Oak Hill Academy his last year in high school. So this is a dude, he knows what real competition looks like. And you know for a fact that a lot of the defense that he was playing at Oak Hill, it's going to have to translate for him at Syracuse. He's going to have to fit into that patented 2-3 zone, or else he's not going to get some of the same opportunities that he had in high school. But from what I could see, I think he's ready to play that level of defense. And I think you do as well, which would be a reason why you like him. Give everybody the rundown on Judah Mintz and why he could be a real sleeper in this draft class.
Yeah, so with Judah Mintz, it starts with the scoring. He's 6'3" and he is an absolute bucket. He can really shoot from three. But it's more so just what he can do off the dribble as far as like his pull-up shooting. He really elevates when he takes shots in the mid-range. Usually you think a guy 6'3", shooting mid-range shots, it can be tough for those guys to be tough shot makers when that's the type of size that you're working with. But he is just nasty in the mid-range. And around the bucket, he kind of compensates for the fact that like he's not totally an above the rim finisher, but he could place his floaters really high, uses interesting angles to finish around the basket to avoid length. He's just got 3-level scoring upside. And we've seen guys like Bones Highland, like these guys that just come in and can score at every single level and really score off the dribble. And that's what Judah Mintz is bringing to the table. I think what separates him from a lot of those guys for me is that he can be a pretty capable passer too. There are definitely possessions where he will dribble the air out of the ball. And I don't think that's uncommon among this type of player at that age. But I don't think he's inherently selfish. And I think his floor vision is pretty solid. And he has a decent understanding of the gravity that he creates when he's attacking. And if there's like an easy pass to make, he'll make it. But I think there's some playmaking that I've seen that goes a little bit above that. And that's where the one and done hope comes from, is that if he goes to Syracuse and he's lighting it up and he's getting buckets, and then he can just make those nice passes and reads from time to time, he's really going to stand out. And it sounds like he's going to be the starting one too. Like they said, Boeheim said that Girard is going to play the 2 spot now. So it basically sounds like this is kind of his team to run. And he was getting comparisons to Johnny Flynn, which I know people think Johnny Flynn, oh, he's a bust, whatever.
No, Johnny Flynn, Syracuse Johnny Flynn was an absolute beast. So if he can live up to that kind of hype
and be 4 inches taller, that matters, and not have, degenerative hip issues also. So he can be a real player.
Stephen, Maxwell sort of alluded to the question that I have regarding Judah Mintz, which is, can he balance being a scorer and looking to get others involved? And Maxwell just said that he's going to be likely the starting point guard for the Syracuse team. But when I talk about can he balance scoring and passing, that's not always he has to be the guy to get that dime for everybody else, and that dime has to be recorded in his box score for me to say, oh, he's a good passer. I think it's more so it's the split between looking to score and being willing to pass, right? Pulling yourself out of some of those bad situations where you can force the shot, you can have the confidence to take it, and maybe you'll make it, but maybe it's also better to just bring the ball back out and find somebody else or keep it moving, not necessarily being an assist hunter. So that's the split that I want to see from Judah. You kind of have the same feeling after watching his tape preseason?
Yeah, the offense isn't really much of a concern for me. Like I trust him, I think, more at the next level as more of an off guard than I would say like a lead guy. Even if he is kind of the point guard, the de facto point guard at Syracuse, none of the film that I watched like screams lead ball handler to me. Like I think that he's probably like a weak side shot creator. Like if the ball is whipping around you trust him to attack like a collapse defense or an aggressive closeout, because he is a capable shooter as well. So, and he's got the athleticism, I think, that can translate to the NBA. But really, I have a lot of defensive concerns with him, like competitiveness on that end, and a lot of the film that I watched. And I think going to Syracuse really isn't going to either solve or it might even like hide some of the issues as well, which might be a strategic commit for him, because he's going to have a lot of people in that scheme to help cover up some of his flaws on that.
I was just going to say, maybe the zone's going to help him, because as long as he's communicating frequently, right, he'll have the help that he needs within that zone.
And then you got the argument that, well, if he's a point guard or a combo guard coming off the bench, like how important is his defense anyway when, you know, all of the defense is hinged upon like either a strong wing or a shot blocking five in the NBA, right? So there's a little bit of an argument on both sides. But when I'm looking at a holistic game compared to all the other guards in this class, like those are things that I think are going to kind of hem up Judah Mintz relative to his peers this year. So I'm okay with him kind of being in the sleeper range. Like I wasn't advocating for him on earlier episodes or anything like that, but I think that he could be a fine player over time. I just don't necessarily buy into the one and done, but that's exactly what makes a sleeper is like even folks like me aren't necessarily looking at him in that, but he does have aspects to his game that are very intriguing.
And it sounds like he will have all of the opportunity at Syracuse to certainly prove whether he can balance those responsibilities, become a better defender, prove that he is a capable outside shooter, not just off the dribble, but maybe even off the catch when somebody else is handling the ball. He's got a spot up somewhere else. These are some of the things I want to see from him. And to your point, Stephen, I know sometimes we talk about guards don't always have to be these incredible on-ball defenders, but if we're evaluating you in a top 30 range, I personally would like to see a guard be somewhat of a problem at the point of attack for somebody else, right? That's just how I feel. But
or play passing lanes aggressively. You know what I mean? Like just Steph Curry, James Harden, like they have had big still years by just playing passing lanes aggressively, like something along those lines.
When you don't have at least one perimeter player who can guard at a plus level at the point of attack, and if all you're doing as a defense is playing Olay to the big man, even Rudy Gobert got played out of situations when that was the case. What arguably the best defender in the world, or at least one of them, was not tailor-made for that style of defense. So yeah, that's why you got to have at least one guy. Maybe it's not Judah Mintz, but you better be playing him next to him to somebody who can offer that sort of a threat on the defensive side. A guard who I'm actually buying in to a lot of the defense that I've seen. We'll talk about another high major player here, Pelle Larsson out of Arizona, the 6'5" junior guard, played in 37 games last year, started in 2 of those games, just under 21 minutes per game, 7.2 points, 3.4 rebounds, 1.8 assists. So we can read off the box score stats. He wasn't playing a lot of minutes. He wasn't playing a big role within the offense, but he's going to have to make a jump this year. And it can be one of the situations. He feels like this Christian Brownish type player for me. Like he feels like the next person to sort of step through that line. This time it's just being done in Arizona versus Kansas. But I mean, he is an efficient player offensively, right? Almost 48% from the field, 36% from 3, 81% from the line. Low turnover player. All those percentages, they add up to a 61.7 shooting percentage. So I'm buying into the defense. I'm buying into the shooting stroke. I don't know how much of an on-ball creator he's going to be, which is probably one of the deficiencies that I would point out between him and Brown. Like Brown was a really good passer in college. I need to see a lot more of that from Pelle Larsson, but I'm not going to rule it out for him. But that's sort of the type of player I could see him breaking out and being. He's built really well. He's strong. He's tough. Stephen, this is a guy I know you've mentioned his name. I know Maxwell's mentioned his name, and all 3 of us were in agreement. We really like him. And I think Rutgers kind of hopping on some of that train with us as well. What are some of your thoughts about Pelle Larsson, and what's something that you want to see from him going into this year?
Yeah, so I just love, you mentioned Brown. I wasn't as high on him as a lot of the guys in No Ceilings were, but I wasn't necessarily out on him either. And now we're watching him kind of have some big moments for Denver in the early going of this year.
That competitiveness, man, that toughness that he displayed countless times at Kansas, and now he's doing it in the NBA. And like
doesn't want to get beat on defense. Nope.
Arizona had a number of those guys last year, and they're returning a few of them, like Tubelis, who we're going to talk about a little later.
Yep.
Your boy Benedict Mathurin played with that same fire. Like, listen, these guys make an impact no matter where they are.
Yep. And listen, like we already know that he's a bona fide cutter. He had to move very well off the ball on a loaded Arizona team last year. Like we mentioned, Benedict Mathurin, Justin Kier was on that team, and then also Dalen Terry, who we saw get drafted this past draft as well. So we know that he's going to be a great cutter. We know that he hustles. We know that he's got good touch based off of the shooting numbers and watching the film. He's an active defender, and he does display some attacking ability off the bounce. And I think that that's going to be asked of him a little bit more with a lot of folks moving off of that Arizona program this last year. I think with that attacking though, some of the areas of concern are can he drive left at all? Like a lot of the times that I saw him drive was with his strong hand, and that's going to be negated in the Pac-12 pretty quickly. He is very feisty and fiery on the ball, but I don't know how good of an athlete he is. Like, I'm not saying he's a bad athlete, but I don't know exactly how strong of an athlete he actually is. And then processing speed on the offensive end. This is just an area that I'm highlighting as like something that I want to monitor, because he was asked to be more of a finisher. Like when he touched the ball, it was either finishing with a layup or shooting a spot up three. If he's going to be playmaking more, like how does he see the game? What do his reads look like? He's going to have to show that ability at Arizona this year. So he's one of these guys that can swing either way for me. Like if all the connector pieces are as good this year as they were last year, and he can do some sort of like offensive generation at all, like this guy could scream up boards in a hurry. And he plays, I've heard Rucker say this a bunch, he plays much larger than he is. I think he's only listed at like 6'5".
Yeah.
But if you watch him play, you would think he was like
Shoot,
6'7"
he looks like
6'8".
he's like 6. Yeah, that's what he looks like out there.
Yeah, exactly. So these are all things that I'm looking at, but I'm really big on our guy, man. I love Pelle Larsson.
Maxwell, what are you looking for from Larsson this season?
Yeah, I'm like fired up about Pelle Larsson. I went real deep into the film on him Thursday, and man, I just came out of it so excited. I think the biggest difference with where I see him versus where you guys see him is I'm actually really bullish on his playmaking.
Okay. So is it more so so you just buy him as a much better quick decision maker, I think, than
I do.
We're buying in right now.
Yeah. I think his like basic just like skip passes and like reads and like extra pass, like that kind of basic stuff is good. But that was a big question for me, because the big thing he's going to need to do is just take a step forward as far as like offensive role. Like he if he scores 9 points a game again, he's not going to be in the conversation. So considering that, I thought, okay, well, what is it going to look like when he's taking on a high responsibility? So I did seek out games where he had higher assist totals. So obviously, yeah, the passing is going to be better in games where he has higher assist totals. But I still really liked what I saw. All in all, like his vision is pretty nice, and he's, smart with like cradle attacks and things like that. And he, again, just a guy who understands his gravity when he gets to the rim. I think his ability to pressure the rim was like the biggest thing that stuck up on me. He's not a guy who you're going to throw it to him on an island and he's just going to blow by a guy, but his pump fake into his first step is phenomenal. And when you can shoot like he does, he's going to have guys that have to close out on him and are going to be a little bit off balance.
And that's what Christian Braun didn't have last year, right? He also lacked that explosiveness, but he didn't have the outside shooting to back up. Like
he also didn't like to shoot when he caught it either. Like he had to dribble every time he caught the ball.
If you can't shoot, why am I going to hard close out on you? Right. Like you got to bring it to me, bud.
Yeah. And I just thought that what he did when he got around the basket was very impressive. Like we touch on the strength, but like guys meet him and he just kind of like bounces off of them and keeps elevating when he gets hit around the basket. But I thought some of his fakes around the rim, the ways that he just leveraged the help defender to get easy ones for his team was good. And then I watched some of the FIBA games of him too, or like the World Cup qualifiers. And he showed some interesting mid-range shot making in those games. I was really impressed with some of his passing there as well. He tried to do some more stuff with the left hand. It wasn't like crazy impressive, but like he did throw like a one pass that was like a one-handed left-handed live dribble pass. It was okay. It like wasn't the most accurate pass I've ever seen. But it really just, again, kind of like showed, all right, like the little things I was worried about, the mid-range shooting, the playmaking, the left hand, it was a little bit better there. So with him, I really just want to see a bigger offensive workload.
And it's good that he's trying those things too, right, Nathan? Like if those are weaknesses and you're not doing them, or at least trying to improve them on in-game play, like people are going to notice that. So I think that it's impressive that he's even trying that stuff.
And that's what's fun when we talk about guys in the sleeper category or the breakout category, right? Like we're talking about them, we're listing off their strengths, their weaknesses, what we like, what we dislike, but really a lot of it comes back to these are guys who they're returners, all but Judah Mintz that we're talking about tonight. We know what they can do, but how does that translate into a bigger role? The role that they're going to have this year. So we're essentially playing a game of projection where we're betting that these guys are not only going to get the bigger role, but that they're going to exceed and excel in it. And that's why they're going to jump up boards. These are guys who we're buying the stock early, right? As Corey would like to say, we're buying low and we're hoping to sell high on these guys. So that's what I love so much about this podcast tonight. So we're all in on Pelle Larsson. Another guy who we talked about quite a bit in No Ceilings last year, Alex Amarante, who also works with us at No Ceilings, did a wonderful piece at the beginning of the year about Taran Armstrong, the Cal Baptist guard, who was tearing it up as a freshman last year, 6'5", 185 pounds, played in 26 games, 10.5 points per game, 5.2 rebounds, 6.3 assists. And those numbers indicate exactly the type of prospect he was last year. He was a lead guard, but he was your lead guard's lead guard, right? This guy was being active on the glass, getting everything that he could from a guard's perspective, rebounding, trying to get out in the break, hit those quick hit ahead passes, get his team going in transition. And then when he got himself in the half court, he's not a guy who's too much of a scoring threat, yet he was able to get these passes literally anywhere that he wanted to get them, which is fascinating to me. Usually when we talk about some of the best passers, they have some kind of scoring gravity, whether it's being a threat with 2 feet in the paint, whether it's being more of a threat from the perimeter. In Taran's case, he wasn't that much of a threat from either spot on the floor. He wasn't a guy who was hunting for all of this contact so he could get to the line to knock down a bunch of free throws, because he wasn't hitting his free throws at a high clip either, right? He could put some points on the board, but and he had a few standout games scoring the ball, but really the majority of the season, it was about him making these ridiculous passes from these incredibly small and narrow angles, because defenses would try and shut off those passing lanes as much as possible. He would still find a way to fit that ball in there. So that's what really stood out to me. So Steven, it's funny. We talked at some points about, is Taran Armstrong the best point guard in the country last year? And there were certainly games on film you could point to that he answered that statement with a yes. I think overall, because of some of the scoring deficiencies, 39% from the field, 31% from three, 65 from the line, he has to answer those questions. But if he does, right, if he becomes a better threat with 2 feet in the paint, if he can hit on some of those open shots, like when he's playing that pick and roll game that he loves to play and defenses are sagging, they're going under those screens. If he can knock down more of those outside shots, we might be talking about somebody who takes a meteoric rise right back up boards, where people would have had him in like the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s last year before he decided to come back to school. He could get all the way back up in the top 30 and keep climbing this year. So, but what do you want to see from Taran Armstrong?
Well, first off, I just want to start off with, in doing some research for a piece that I'm going to have releasing on Sunday. You'd be surprised how many quote unquote shooters shot around 31% or worse and are still still got drafted or projected to do great things in their returning season in college. So I'm not going to knock Mr. Taran Armstrong for a low shooting percentage, especially since he's coming back. Big believer in the playmaking and the vision. I mean, at his size, he's not like, Giddy, where he's 6'8" or anything like that. But
no, but 6'5" still, you can
6'5",
see over
6'6" is still a heck of a perspective for your lead guard to have. And I think that, it helps give such unique passing angles that otherwise you're not going to be able to take advantage of. He plays with a lot of bend. His attacks off the bounce and things like that, they're so much fun to watch. He can get to those Steve Nash, attack the baseline wraparound passes, which are really fun. No look whip passes to the opposite side of the court. It's so much fun to watch. And I was really surprised. I know his brother also plays for Cal Baptist. I was really surprised that when he came back, he stayed, because I think there would have been a number of high level programs that would have been like, all right, dude, like, let's get you in here and we will ensure that you get drafted if you play for us. He's betting on himself. He's playing with his brother. I love that. I don't even necessarily think he has to get drafted this year, right? But if he can improve as a shooter and he can improve his strength and playmaking, combination to where he can either finish scoring or pass out of traffic a little bit more, with consistency and accuracy, he's going to end up being on draft radars regardless. So despite him not being a plus athlete, I still think that he gives enough, creation on the offensive end to where he's going to be a name that, NBA front offices are got to monitor throughout the year.
Maxwell, what do you want to see from Taron Armstrong this upcoming year?
I want to see him do more as a scorer off the dribble, because he's such a sharp decision maker, and he's not one of these high assist guys. That, like, it's somebody who did research for No Sun Turn. There's so many guys that post high assist numbers that just are dribbling the air out of the ball, looking and waiting until the shot clock is at 3 so that they're well positioned for an assist. That's not Taron Armstrong. He's a phenomenal quick thinker and decision maker. He's just got to find a better way to pressure the defense, because with what he does right now, like, he's already so great at setting the table. Yep. But if he could just pressure teams more when there's a pick and roll situation, like you said, and just force guys to go over, or even if he can, get that Chris Paul, like, mid-range pull-up game working, that's something that could be there for him. I think it is interesting. And obviously, like, everyone's not their siblings. People are different than their family members, but his brother can really shoot. And part of that makes me think, like, why not Taron? So that's the next step for him, is I think just developing some sort of scoring game off the dribble, because we're ultimately talking about a guy at Cal Baptist who scores 10 points a game, and guys that score 10 points a game in that conference don't normally get drafted. And the passing is really special, but he's got to find more ways to pressure the defense outside of his passing.
Speaking of prospects who need to improve their threat from the outside and really improve their scoring threat overall, Jalen Warley, another guard who was on my radar at Florida State, 6'6", 200 pounds, did not get a ton of opportunity last year. The shooting splits would also bear that out. But when you did get these small amounts of film with Jalen Warley, we know the defense is going to stand out. This man can be one incredible defender in the backcourt. He's being coached to be such going to Florida State. He is a steals maker. He is a transition guy. He is a passer and a finisher in transition. Obviously, the half court, we're going to need to see some offensive improvements from him. But my question for Mr. Maxwell, there was another guy once upon a time that Steven actually already mentioned in this podcast, who was viewed as a defense first guard, who had tremendous size for his position, who had tremendous length for his position. He just needed to refine enough of his offensive game and his decision-making to where it allowed the defense to really pop and shine on film, because he was able to play a big role. He was able to play more minutes for a really good team. I think Florida State has the chance to be a pretty good team in the ACC this year. And if that's the case, why can't Jalen Warley's stock explode out of nowhere like Dalen Terry's did last year? Why can't that happen for somebody like him? Talk to me about your thoughts about Jalen Warley. Is he on your radar? What are some of your thoughts about his game?
He is. He's like not in draftable range heading into the season, but like he's on the cusp of it. If he can do some things as a scorer, he'll be there. Great, good first step, long, he's bursty, he covers ground so well, and he's really smart about how he helps off the ball as a defender. He's good with just swiping, getting back, not losing his man. I was just really impressed though by some of the skills he showed as a finisher, given that his efficiency splits were really bad. But he can finish with both his left and right hand already. He's stronger than he looks. He can pass one-handed through tight windows. His lobs are accurate. So you look at his ability to pressure the rim. He can finish with both hands there. The only thing that's missing is just jump shooting. And Florida State's track record, I feel like, is kind of hit and miss when it comes to shooting. Like, they have a lot of guys who are big, long, defend and know how to shoot, and know how to play make. But you don't always see big jumps with shooting. But shooting, I feel like historically is one of those things that it tends to be easier to pick up and improve upon. So that's all I'm looking for from him. If he can just become an average outside shooter, I think everything he does as a playmaker, a finisher, and defender is there. So that's all I'm really looking for this season is, can he score more efficiently?
Steven, do you want to see some of the same things with Mr. Warley? Because I agree with Maxwell in a lot of respects. I think the biggest thing for him is just confidence being able to grow into a larger role. If he becomes a much more confident offensive player, we know what he does in transition. I think more of that can translate in the half court. He could be much more comfortable getting downhill, banging with some guys, being able to hang and finish like Maxwell talked about around the basket. I think it's just the confidence that really needs to come up for him. But if he embraces the fight at Florida State, why can't he be a riser?
It's really interesting, Nathan. Like, I don't know what the pecking order for Florida State is going to look like this year. Like, we know historically they're a deep team and they're going to play a lot of guys, but with Baba Miller, we're talking about Worley here, Matthew Cleveland, another guy who could end up being a sleeper because he was a name that a lot of folks were high on last year. And then this year, there's still people that think that he could do a little something.
I still like his partner in the backcourt, Caleb Mills. I still like Caleb Mills as a shooter and scorer.
And so you got all these guys on this team. Like, where does Worley fit in? And if he does have that confidence, he could step up and be that kind of point forward, kind of like two-way wing player that I think a lot of people had him pegged at originally. So with the playmaking, the size, the skill ratio, I would say he's a good, not great defender, at least last year. Like, if he can hone in on that with another year at Florida State, like, I don't think that he'll get worse on that end. So if anything, He'll probably get a little bit better. The shooting touch has got to be there. And Maxwell, we talked about this on a couple episodes back when we did our 30 questions for 30 teams. When we were talking about Cleveland, we talked about Isaac Okoro, right? And he's a player that if all he needed to really do was add that jumper. And I think that sometimes teams can fall victim into that mentality that the shot is always easier. Some players it is. Like, some people pick it up really quickly, but I mean, that could be the difference between Jalen Worley being like an Isaac Okoro or would be cool, Jimmy Butler, right? Or Kawhi Leonard. So those are the two completely type of different developmental paths that we see for these players that don't necessarily come into the NBA with a jumper. But I have Worley as like an early to mid 70s on my board right now. He's definitely in one of those like wait and see ranges because there is enough there with the creation and the size and athleticism.
Which by the way, that's
intriguing.
That's a fair range for a lot of these guys like you're talking about, because when we say sleepers, we're not trying to talk about somebody at 35 is a major sleeper in the NBA draft, right? Like, these guys are all in the 50s, 60s, 70s, they're back, but there are reasonable outcomes to where these guys could all of a sudden be like, oh shit, we have to rank them in the first round. So
if you stare at them long enough, you can see a path to where they can get higher up on your boards for sure.
Absolutely. And Steven, I know that you're going to say the same thing about Trey Alexander, the Creighton guard, who we're going to move to next. 6'4", 187-pound sophomore, averaged 7.4 points per game last year, 3.7 rebounds, 2.5 assists, played in 35 games for Creighton and played almost 27 minutes a night. So he had a legitimate role as a freshman for a good Creighton team. 42% from the field, 81.8% from the free throw line, but 28.1% from three. So as you said, a lot of these guys we're talking about, like, we could name role within the offense is something we want to see more of, obviously, as they grow into another year. Shooting consistency is something that we want to see from these guys. But really, when you break down all of the film of what this man can do inside the arc, with how crafty he is, with some of the up and unders he can do, the occasional post up if he has a matchup at the guard spot, like, this man has some real shit in his bag. And to me, the question is, can he become an average spot up shooter to set up more of all of that stuff that I just talked about? His finishing around the basket, getting those lanes to actually get downhill, to be able to make some of those dump off passes. He needs to be able to get to those spots by bringing out defenders to him, because he's not this overly impressive athlete who's going to blow by every single person he goes up against. So are you buying in enough of the shot to where he can be average to open up everything else I'm sure you're going to talk about with this game?
Absolutely. I think that the 3-point shot is an aberration from what we're going to see for him moving forward. I'm a believer in the shot, and looking at Creighton this year with how their young guys are stepping up into more sizable roles. They bring in a guy like Shireman. Like, there is just so much,
that team is loaded.
They're going to be so good, man. And like, him at the helm, like running pick and rolls with Brenner and with Kaluma, there's going to be so many different reads that he's going to be able to take advantage of. Like, there's a little bit of Nembhard in his game, and we just saw him get drafted in the second round, right? So I think if he can continue to show to be an intelligible playmaker, he has such a nice handle, man. Like his court vision is right there. The shot off of movement really gets me going too. So I think that learning how to be a standstill shooter with the bag that he already has, I think will be an easier transition for him because he's not a guy whose game is based off of pure athleticism. It's based off of skill and IQ and understanding. So I could see his transition into being a better spot up shooter, being a little bit more achievable. But again, if we're talking about negatives, right? Like he can really force a shot sometimes with that shot off the movement. His defensive rotations leave a lot to be desired. And because of his size, he's not going to be as switchable at the pro level. So it's really going to pigeonhole him into a couple of different types of roles. I have a top 60 grade on him right now. I'm really big on my guy. I love him a lot. I love his team a lot. And I think that he's going to have a really big role in the success of him.
I am curious to see how that defense comes out for Creighton, that perimeter defense, because that could be a Swiss cheese backcourt, and
yes.
we will see what happens with when those guys get funneled into the front court. Maxwell, you buying stock in Trey Alexander?
I am. Yeah, I really liked him early in the year last year before things were clicking as like a 3 years away kind of guy, and now like the way he played down the stretch, it's very possible that he's in the mix this year. He is top 60 for me headed into the year. Big part of that last 10 games of the season, 12.2 points, 4.5 rebounds, 4.3 assists. Also at 33% of his threes down the stretch. The way that I've been right about it, my Jalen Hood-Schifino article, but like the way he shoots mid-range pull-ups just gives me so much confidence in the fact that he's going to be able to hit threes consistently. I really love the way that he manipulates defenders in the pick and roll, not even just to like get a big on himself, but to recognize like, oh, I've got a small on my big and I'm going to back out to the perimeter. I'm going to throw the ball into my man and I'm going to locate away from my big man. Yep. I'm going to give him space to cook the smaller defender down low.
That Jared Butler type stuff that I absolutely loved with him. And I can see myself falling in love with it with Trey Alexander as well.
Yeah. For me, so I buy the shot. So my concern with him, it's two things. It's defense and it's rim finishing. He's got to pressure the rim in a more meaningful way to create a little bit better. He's not super vertical. And the other thing with him too, like when we did the playback for the G League Ignite game, we talked a lot about Scoot Henderson's angles at the rims and the way that he'd protect the ball on the way up. Trey Alexander doesn't do that. He really lets his shot get blocked and affected way more at the rim than he should. So that's something he really needs to clean up. And then defense, he can take really sloppy angles around screens, doesn't navigate them that well, even on the ball. So like that's an area he's really got to polish up, and they're going to have Ryan Kalkbrenner behind him, which is, a big relief. But like we talked about with Gobert, it doesn't matter how good of a rim protector you are. If you've got nobody else on the court,
if
really
every single
to
person
well,
is leaking the guys through, what are you going to do?
So just for a Mateen standpoint alone, he's got to work on that. But from his draft stock as well, for me, it's just how he does defensively, how he's navigating screens on defense, and what he does at the rim.
All right, Maxwell, I can't not go to you with somebody who shares the same name. The player we're moving to next. We're going to talk about some wings here. Maxwell Lewis, out of Pepperdine, 6'7", 195 pounds, going into his sophomore season. Listen, the numbers aren't quite going to pop off the screen with you from a counting stats perspective. The shooting percentages are good. 42% from the field, 36 from three, 80% from the line. That suggests this man can shoot. When you watch the tape, man, can this guy shoot? Not only can he shoot, we're talking about somebody who, in some of his best highlights, I mean, he's hitting pull-up shots, he's hitting post fades off of wing defender. Like this guy has the 3-level shot-making package that you want to see from somebody who's 6'7". Yeah. But my question about him is, Maxwell, can he be a go-to option on a legitimate NCAA tournament team? Like that's what we want to see. Like I've seen examples now of all the different types of shots that I see from some of the best scorers we have at the next level. Can he do it consistently? And can he do it more volume with much more pressure from the defense because he's the go-to guy? Where are you at on somebody like Maxwell Lewis?
Yeah, so I am really intrigued with Maxwell Lewis. And like before I got to know ceilings, like one of the proudest things I ever did was write about Maxwell Lewis and have Chad Ford give me a tip of the hat for it. I was like so fired up when that happened back in the Bound Boards days. But yeah, so Maxwell Lewis is a guy I've had my eye on for some time. I love his tools and some of the things he can do as a scorer right now. Like you said, 3 levels, really explodes at the rim, has a little bit of like mid post to him, and a legit 3-point shooter, great off the catch, but also like hitting off side steps and things like that. And the way he attacks, it's 6'7", his hips and shiftiness going downhill. He kind of moves like a guard when he attacks with the ball at times. And on defense, same thing. He rotates well. If he needs to rotate, he's going to get where he needs to go quickly. That being quick off the floor, again, super important when it comes to help side rim protection. He's active on the defensive end. The big thing with him are the turnovers. This guy turns the ball over a lot. And the most common reason is he plays very sped up. I don't think there was a player in the country that had more I caught the ball and got too excited and took 3 steps before dribbling type turnovers than Maxwell Lewis
to that
season.
point, if you would average out his numbers per 36 minutes, it's going to be almost 4 turnovers per game. So that's a lot.
He needs to just slow down off the catch. Once he's moving, go as fast as you want. When he's putting the ball on the ground, he's headed toward the basket with a head of steam. He's lightning. Like, he's awesome. He's just got to take a second and be composed. Normally with so many guys, and this is part of the reason why I'm optimistic on him, actually, we talk about how they need to make decisions quicker. They need that 0.5. They need to be ready to go. With Maxwell Lewis, I want to see the opposite. I want to see him just like take a breath sometimes and be a little bit, more poised. The other thing with him too, that bothers me is I feel like he should be a better rebounder given his size and athleticism. I really want to see that uptick, especially because last season, Pepperdine, their post defense and their rebounding were just really poor. And they would play they were the youngest team in the WCC, like substantially. And they would be in games with teams, they'd be playing them tight and they'd fall apart in the second half. And it was almost always rebounding and post defense and guys getting easy looks at the rim. He really has the tools to help out in that area. So I'd really like to see him do that as well. But the turnovers are like like the biggest thing. You cannot be turning the ball over that much and play a role in the NBA.
Steven, if you thought that I was going to come to you and not give you an opportunity to plug your own handiwork, you'd be dead wrong, my friend. I needed to include at least one Pepperdine player on this list because you wrote about another one. You wrote about Houston Mallett, who is also a potential draft prospect in 2023. So I'll just point the question to you like this. Which one of those 2 guys do you like better as a prospect? You like Maxwell Lewis or Houston Mallett? Go ahead and plug your thoughts on both, my friend.
I like Houston Mallett more, but I also have like a top 50 grade on Maxwell Lewis. Like, I think that he is an NBA player right now. I like the creation that Mallett has as far as like for himself and what I think is going to be for others. I think that he's going to have a substantially larger role in facilitating this upcoming year based on what I've read and what I've seen like as the season progressed. But Maxwell hit it on the head with Maxwell Lewis, man. Like, the shooting, the tough shot making, the athleticism that this guy possesses. He is a quick riser. That's one of the things that I put in my notes as well. I think, though, as good as he is offensively, athletically, it's weird how on the defensive side that it almost like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde's it, right? Like, the lateral wiggle that he has on the offensive end, like, it doesn't translate to his defensive rotations. And maybe that has to do with like processing the game on that side of the ball at such a young age. Like, maybe he just needs another year of like learning and development, but I think that it will translate. And his handle is a little bit loose at times. So to me, when I'm looking at someone who can do the things that he does and the handle isn't there, I kind of envision him more as a 4 in the NBA because I think that that's going to be like his bread and butter. And being a spot up 4 who can do the things that he does and with improved help side defense this year, like, he could be a real problem for teams when he gets minutes in the NBA. So I like him a great bit. Even though I have him like on the later side of my top 50, I kind of have to check and balance my feelings sometimes because I can be biased with some of these guys that I like a lot. So I kind of have him on that latter end, but I could easily slide him up to like the mid to late 30s, early 40s range. Like it's that thin of a talent differential to me.
I think he's going to be in the first round at some point this year. I really do.
Okay.
Now, whether he stays there and whether he actually gets drafted in the top 30, we'll find out. But I think amongst consensus boards, if I were to put together a big board tracker, which I do for us behind the scenes, I'm going to try to keep that together for no ceilings this year. But if I were to average out everybody's rankings, I think Maxwell Lewis is going to be a top 30 guy at some point. I really do. I buy into this Pepperdine team. I think they're fun.
They're awesome.
For all the reasons you talked about with both of those guys. Steven, there's a few other guys on that team who I think are going to have good college years at the very least. I'm all in. So I'm buying big stock.
If it can happen with Orlando Robinson out of Fresno State, then there's no reason why Maxwell Lewis can't get top 30 buzz at some point.
That's right. So I got to go back to you again, Steven, because it's Woo Pig time.
Woo Pig. Let's go.
Your boys, Ricky Council IV, Arkansas player, transfer in from Wichita State, 6'6", 205 pounds, played in 28 games last year, started in 7 of them, 12 points per game, 5.4 rebounds, 1.6 assists, 43.7% from the field, 30.6% from three, 84.9% from the line. That's one of the higher free throw percentages we've seen from a few of these guys we've looked at who quote unquote can't shoot. He's got pretty good touch from the line to indicate that he can. 1.1 steals per game, almost a 20 PER, and 55.6 for shooting percentage. So Steven, we know about the athleticism and the bounce for Ricky Council, right? Like you can go on YouTube, you can see some of the in-game dunks, you can see some of the dunk contest stuff. Like we know what type of athlete this dude is at 6'6". But how much shooting can he provide for a team that desperately needs floor spacing? I mean, we addressed this at length when we talked about Nick Smith Jr. and how great of a guard prospect he is. But given how little of room there's going to be for him to operate potentially, because defenses are just going to be able to crowd into the paint, make those mid-range shots harder without other guys spacing the floor, it's going to make his life potentially a living hell. So can Ricky Council, one of these sleeper prospects who I've seen in enough top 40s at this point, I've seen his name in enough top 40s, top 50s, can he be one of those guys who comes in, provides a little bit of relief for those Razorbacks, and maybe by doing so jumps right into potential first round conversation or close enough to it?
I don't know if he's going to get that high. But I think that he can generate some buzz. I kind of have him in that Jalen Worley range where it's like, I see a path. I'm not there yet in terms of grading him against some of the other guys in this class, because I mean, listen, he's got great size. He's got a great pull-up mid-range game that I love a lot. He can attack closeouts with the best of them. And I think that once he gets inside that three-point line, there's not really much that he cannot do. But when I look at him as a three-point shooter, Maxwell, I'm curious to see what you think about this. He has such a weird lift in his shot too. It's just like, I don't know if he's trying to do exactly the same thing that he does from closer to the basket, just further out. But to me, it's not working, and when he does get inside, the contact finishing is kind of another area of concern that I have. And going and playing in the SEC compared to Wichita State, like that's a whole nother type of athleticism that he's going to have to contend with, like Johnny Broome, Charles Bediako, like the list goes on and on. There's going to be no shortage of big men that he's going to be lined up against on it. Colin Castleton, like I could go on and on Damian Collins. There's going to be a lot of big Oscar Sheep. There's bigs that he's going to have to try to finish up against. I'm concerned about how he's going to be able to do that. If he gets fouled, I'm not so concerned, right? Defensively, dies on screens, which is really concerning for his size and the position that he plays. He's going to have to compete, especially at Arkansas, who is going to be a big team positionally across the board. Like some of their lineups they're going to be giants out there positionally. And I have concerns about what his role is going to be on this team. Like, is he going to start with Nick Smith Jr. and Anthony Black with Jordan Walsh on the bench, or does Walsh kind of play like a small ball 4 and like have a garbage man role with Council out there on the wing?
I think he
Anthony
could,
Black.
and I'd venture to say I think he should. Right, I think that would make his life a lot easier development wise.
And then you got Brazil out there too. So like talk about an ultimate switchy, like nasty lineup that no one's going to want to dribble the ball full court up against. Is going to be hell for him. But I don't know. I think Council has enough offense in his game. And it, with Musselman being like one of the ultimate like college player empowerment coaches, I think that he's going to highlight his strengths well. So I think that he did transfer to a great university. There's just the 3-point shot's got to be it, man. Like that's really it. And if he can improve on his defensive fundamentals.
Maxwell, where are you at on Ricky Council?
Yeah, so he was another no stone unturned guy who I like picked, and then a bunch of people got really into him like before I could hit publish, and it's like, oh well, all right. I actually kind of came out on him like sort of lower than where the consensus was. Like I think he's a real NBA prospect, but I do think there's some serious problems. Like Steven mentioned the shot. It's interesting if you look at the shooting numbers, he's actually really good on threes off the dribble, and he's bad off the catch. And he has like what I call the Josh Christopher shot, where it just tracks up the wrong side of his body. Like he's a right-handed shooter and the whole motion is up his like hip dip up the left side and over.
Is it all mechanical? Is it shot prep or like are there tweaks he can make there as well?
I think it's mechanical because off the dribble, it tracks more up the center of his body. And those are the shots that he hits. So like to me, that's like my best guess. I'm not a shot doctor, but that's what I feel like it is. I think he's like surprisingly crafty as a driver. I mean, we got like obviously again, we've touched on the athleticism, but like he was throwing in some Euro steps and other things like that. He can really play make for himself because of what he can do as a scorer off the dribble. And again, like the rim finishing is not good, but he gets there a lot and he goes to the free throw line a ton. Just because he's willing to deal with the contact at the very least. There's like, if you squint, there's some Keon Ellis there. The other thing I really want to see from him though is just playmaking for others, because right now, like I mentioned, he can do it for himself. His passing, the placement isn't always there. Like there'll be someone who's pretty obviously going to get in a passing lane and he won't account for that, or he'll throw a pass that doesn't have enough zip on it. He'll be way too lazy with post entries at times. Like I just want to see him tighten up the playmaking for others, because he took such a big step for himself this past season that I think it's doable.
Steven, any other thoughts that you want to throw in about Ricky Council with what some of Maxwell said?
No, I think that he kind of touched on a lot of the same things that I was talking about. I just, again, defense and 3-point shooting. Like if you're going to be a wing in the NBA, like you got to do at least one of those things good to great, and you got to be passable on the other one. So
I'm hoping for the best for Arkansas, man. We know they're going to be a fun team to watch, but he's going to be part of that depth that I think really needs to come alive for them if they want to go all the way and possibly win a championship together. A player on another SEC squad who Florida is going to be pretty damn interesting this year. Mm-hmm. And I have some words about Florida coming out in one of our conference previews that we'll be publishing on those ceilings over the coming week or two. But Will Richard is a big reason about why they're going to be interesting. The 6'4", 206-pound wing, 33 games played last year. He was a transfer in, 30 games started, 12.1 points per game, 6 rebounds, 1.8 assists, 47% from the field, 32.6% from three, 80% from the line, 2 stocks per game, 21.6 PER, and a 58.8 true shooting percentage. Maxwell, I'm really curious to get your thoughts on Will. I want to know what you think about this guy, because he wasn't on my radar in the slightest last year. And then our good friend Simon Rath, Hawks Draftner, was like, no. Everybody has to pay attention to this guy. He's going to be one of the highly sought out for transfers on the market. And between him and Johnny Broome, it was like a contest of like, where are both of these guys going to go? Who's going to snatch him up? And he decided to go to Florida. And I think that's an interesting fit defensively for the team. Like now, all of a sudden they have defensive firepower everywhere. Like I would not want to have to play Florida this year. And he's going to be a big reason why, but to the defense as well as the offense, what do you see from him? What are you intrigued by?
Yeah, so I'm not a comps guy, but there's a lot of Josh Hart in Will Richard.
Oh, I love that name.
Yeah, I do too. He's 6'5". He is tough as nails, like tough as nails. Rebounds like a big. I've watched a ton of Belmont between like just interest in Will Richard and Ben Shepherd over the past several months, and like this guy's. He's like a real 4 at 6'5". Like they would play major conference teams. He would play the 4 because that's what he played at Belmont, and he would guard those guys. He have no problem with it, just due to his strength. in the way that he rebounds. Like that's where the Josh Hart comes in. And he's a real solid shooter too. The shot, like he had like a really bad dip in the shooting at one point during the season. That kind of buoyed his percentage a little bit. But ultimately I buy it long term. It's a quick trigger shot. It's pretty, it's textbook looking. But yeah, otherwise he's also a really good finisher. He makes the extra pass, totally unselfish. He's going to work to get blocks on defense. He's got a good nose for that. He works to recover when he gets beat. He's just a guy that competes and has a lot of necessary skills that make modern NBA players, and a pro body already too. Like the strength is real with him. My biggest like, oh boy, we've got to work on this is because he's strong. He's a little bulky. And when he has to chase guys around on defense, he doesn't look too great in those settings. The other thing is he gets a little stat hungry on defense at times. This man has a fever, and the only prescription is helping off the strong side corner to try and get a block. He's really got to work on that. I don't think I saw a player like it's a real prospect that cheated off the strong side corner more than Will Richard this past year. So that's like an issue. He'll get off his feet too easily to try and get a block. But fundamentally, like the rest of it's there. It's just like one of those things he's got to hone in. And he's a young player. And given just how hard this kid plays, I have no doubt in my mind that he's gonna like reel that in when he's coached to do so.
I mean, making the jump from mid-major to high major like he has, and doing it in impressive fashion, Stephen, where he was one of the most sought out transfers on the market, period. Like, I have no doubt that if he can make that sort of a leap in 1 year, now give him the span of 2 years, and he could really pop on a lot of NBA radars. Where are you at with Will Richard?
I love Will Richard, man. Like I flirted with having a draftable grade on him last season. You know, yeah. I enjoyed his game a lot. And I think his transition going from Belmont to Florida is going to be interesting because he's going to go from a university where he could literally do whatever he wants. Like he was clearly the best player on the team. He could gamble. He was the best player on his team last year, in my humble opinion, and could really do whatever he want. And by and large, it worked out for him. Now that he's going to have to play along some other guys like Kawasi Reeves, Colin Castleton, Alex Fudge, baby, I'm going to have Fudge fever again this year. Like the traps that he and Fudge are going to be able to put on people. I don't know if it's going to be Torrey East and Alex Fudge good, but it's still going to be good. It's still going to drive people nuts. Offensively, he's got to just be more disciplined, you know, like the shot selection by and large has got to be more disciplined. The shot efficiency has to be more disciplined, and getting others involved, I think, is going to be more fun for him. I think that he's going to actually get his, the ball movement up because of the talent that's going to be around him. Like he and Castleton, I think, are going to have some fun pick and roll action together in SEC play this year. So if Alex Fudge can space the floor a little bit this year, like Florida could be a scary offensive team if Will Richards is just allowed to cook.
Speaking of scary offense, Kobe Brea out of Dayton, 6'6" guard. This is one of my guys, man. 35 games played last year, 8.1 points per game, 2.9 rebounds, 0.8 assists. Those numbers aren't going to jump out at you, just like some of these other guys. These are players who we're expecting to have much expanded roles. When I say much expanded roles, I mean I want to see Kobe Brea try and be the lead scorer for Dayton this year. I think he can do it. I think this man is an absolute bucket. 44% from the field last year, 42.3% from three, 62% from the line. That's a little scary. These guys who shoot high percentage from three, but don't convert the free throws to back it up, that's a little scary. But if he becomes a better finisher around the basket, I'm buying all the mid-range pull-up game. I am buying all the three-point game. If he can finish better around the basket, get to the line a little more frequently, knock down more of those free throws, there are going to be few things that can stop this man from being one of the more complete scorers in all of college basketball, and could be a massive, massive riser in NBA draft circles. That's how much I believe this kid could really climb this year. Steven, I know that you like Kobe Brea too. I think I might have shocked you a little bit with some of the words that I just said, but where are you at with Mr. Brea?
You didn't shock me at all because, you know, you were the one that kind of turned me on to him, man. And it's just like, you introduced me to him, and I'm hooked, man. I love his size. He just moves so well for being his size. Like he moves like an NBA wing already. Just watching him play basketball, it's like you just notice immediately that there's something special about this guy. Defensively, he has active hands. I wish he would stay in front of his man a little bit better on the defensive side of the ball. But I think that he can. Like he's still a young guy. Like improving defensively, sometimes it just takes years and years and years of practice.
Yeah,
and
the on-ball stuff is definitely lacking. Yep.
But he could fit into a team construct defensively, and that's, if you could be an offensive engine, that's more than okay, right?
Which, by the way, they're going to have one of the best shot blockers in the country, arguably, in Deron Holmes backing him up. So
absolutely. So, it just kind of like cleans up for a lot of his errors, right? I want to see if he can handle more, like if he can initiate offense. Like that's going to be something that I'm monitoring, because listen, we already know that he's a shooter. His off-ball movement is so pretty. Like it's like he and the ball handler are attached to a pole. Like they're like foosball players, to where you move the pole and like they're going to stay that same distance away from each other. And he just spaces the floor so beautifully. His mid-range game is there. He can shoot off the catch or off movement. And again, if he can work on the handle, and if he can finish through contact, like you're talking about a complete total package score. And no NBA team is going to look at that and be like, no, I think I'm okay. I don't think I want to draft
as well. He's not like one of these like 6'2", 6'3" guards who we're talking about. Like, yeah, he can score the ball, but because we have all these other questions and he's smaller, like we're going to pass on him. Like, no, he's 6'6", 206 pounds. He's a big boy.
Nathan, is it crazy that I get like weird Klay Thompson vibes from this guy? Is that crazy or not? Is that crazy? Tell me I'm crazy if I'm crazy.
Yes, it's crazy. But
okay.
Listen, I think if it's in the sense of Klay Thompson can get astronomically hot and just hit every single shot he makes. I would never buy Kobe Bryant. I would never buy anybody to have the consistency that Klay Thompson's had through his career. But if we're talking about just that aspect, the microwave shooting ability to hit like 5, 6, 7 threes in a row and like literally out of nowhere, I buy that for Kobe Bryant. I think his confidence is through the roof. So that you can talk me into. Maxwell, I don't know. You seem a little surprised up there with what we're talking about. Where's your skepticism?
I hate to be the Debbie Downer, like especially on the sleeper spot. I just like
that's okay, man. I
just don't really see it this year with Kobe Bryant. I think the biggest thing for me is I don't think the opportunity is going to be there. Like there are just too many guys coming back on this team. I think I mentioned last spot, like Deron Holmes, I think is taking a big jump. I thought Malachi Smith was tremendous as a freshman and is going to have a ton of responsibility again.
Kamara's still there.
Kamara's still there. Kobe Elvis had some games late in the season where he got really hot and like played really well. So I just don't see the usage uptick coming from him. I think if anything, and he's smaller than this guy, but like I see the Cole Swider path for Kobe Bryant.
Okay.
Of just like, hey, like junior season, like real solid yet again, still not taking a ton of twos. And then senior year, maybe he gets that more bit of responsibility, shows some more stuff, and then kind of like ends up on a two-way type thing.
So what you're saying is Kobe Bryant is eventually going to be on the Lakers.
Yeah. Future saying. Laker Kobe Bryant.
Got it.
No,
he might play for the Lakers this year.
He probably could, honestly. Like gun to your head, Matt Ryan or Kobe Bryant.
So, you know who we're going with. So
yeah. So I really like the shot. I thought some of like the stuff he did show when he went inside the arc, like his sort of like Dirk fadeaway that he'd do over smalls was pretty cool. Love his, like, again, not just a catch and shoot guy. Love the pump fake and sidestep. Defensively, yeah, I'm not crazy about him on the ball, but I think his instincts and mind for defense is pretty good. Just so for a guy would pick up the ball and he'd be like, oh, I will now deny my man the ball because that guy can't dribble. Like little stuff that like college players still don't do sometimes. Like it's there for him. He has a good understanding of the game. I just don't see a way that he really pops this year. I hope I'm wrong. Like Dayton should be a ton of fun on paper. It would bring me like, I'd get so much joy out of this dude scoring like 14 a game and just hitting 46% of his threes and going crazy. I just don't really see the opportunity this year.
All right, we're gonna have to keep this podcast filed somewhere. We will see who ends up on the right side of the Brave.
That's why we're a special show, man, because like we don't just all talk about dudes that we're all in agreement with.
Oh, absolutely.
I love it.
And we also we all keep the receipts, and we have no problems admitting our wrongs from those receipts. So I love that too. Steven, you watched a lot of Arizona basketball last year, mainly because you were just so in love with Bennedict Mathurin, which we all should have been more in love with Bennedict Mathurin, but that's okay. See, we keep receipts. We admit our wrongs. It's okay. It's okay. He's arguably going to be rookie of the year. I think I picked him actually to be rookie of the year over Paolo. He's off to a great start. But in playing with Bennedict Mathurin, you had a number of interesting players. You had Kirk Risa. You had some Pelle Larsson, who we talked about. You had Azuolas Tubelis, who we're about to talk about right now, the 6'11", 245-pound big man, 14 points per game, 6.2 rebounds, 2.3 assists, 54% from the field, 26% from three, 67% from the line, 1.8 stocks, a 24.4 PER, and a 57.8 true shooting percentage. Steven, what I want to see from Tubelis, I think all the rebounding stuff is there, the motor stuff, the hustle, the tenacity, the strength, the ability to score from the inside, some of the outside touch. I just want to see the efficiency really come up. I think we've seen examples of all the different pieces, but if he's one of these guys who's going to have a true shooting percentage north of 60, now you're going to really start to sell NBA teams like, oh, he's not just the guy who's going to dive for a few loose balls and come up with it and make those kinds of plays for your team, which it's important. You always want to have those types of guys in an NBA locker room who are that tough, who are willing to do anything to win. But now you're telling me that he's also going to be a legitimate offensive force, along with the passing flashes that we see off the dribble, along with the inside finishing that we've seen, along with some of the open three-point making. If you're telling me he's doing those things, but at a much higher clip, that's what I want to see from Tubelis to possibly pop into that first round territory. Because there are enough fans of him, I think, in the second round. But what can he do to get up in the top 30? That's what I want to see. True shooting north of 60%. What do you want to see from Tubelis?
Well, I have a top 30 grade on him right now. Like, I love Tubelis.
Wow. So he's already there for you. Okay. All right.
He's already there for me, man. Because listen, he's competitive and fiery on defense, on the defensive side of the ball. He's more athletic than you would assume, like after just watching him play a couple times. Like if you watch him holistically throughout the game, like he does he's white. I'm going to say it. We're white. He's a sneaky athlete. Like you don't expect it, but it's there, right? So I got the elephant out of the room, right? What I love is the combination of post play, which still has a place in today's NBA, but I also love what he can do on the elbow, whether that's like put the ball on the ground a couple times, do a couple little crafty things to get himself a bucket. But he is like tailor-made for NBA offenses where he can operate out of the DHO.
I love the freaking passing flashes, man. And the DHO game that you just made. Yeah, I love that.
Because listen, a lot of bigs, they'll typically just hand the ball off on the DHO. But Tubelis can do the thing where like the guy doesn't get the handoff and the defender rubs off of him and he'll just pass over the top for a dump off. And if you can do that at his size, that gives an offense such a unique wrinkle that it's hard to game plan for, and it's even harder to execute against. I love the thought of him operating out of DHO sets or even playmaking out of the post where he takes a dribble, power bounce, draw like the gravity because of how strong he is that's going to come to him and be able to find an open guy. That's the extra stuff as an offensive big that NBA teams are going to want from you.
That's why I want to see the percentages come up, though, because if he's a 60% finisher around the basket, now you're talking about, oh, we have to throw double teams at him. Now all those other windows are open for him.
And I want to see Arizona run him at the 5. Like, I don't know if it's going to happen because they got Ballo on that team, and I have concerns about him mobility-wise. So I would love to see Tubelis get the chance to run and play make as a 5 on this Arizona team because of all the other players that they're going to have around him. So just the extended shot, I think, is a given, right? Like he didn't have the best efficiency from shooting outside. I think that the touch is there. I think it can be extended. I just want to see him play at the 5, and I want to see the offense run through him. I think that would be so much fun.
Maxwell, I'd be a little surprised if you also said you had a top 30 grade on him, because I don't. I'd be a little surprised about that one. But if you do, Happily. Explain where you have Azuolas Tubelis.
Yeah, I don't have him that high. I do have a draftable grade on him though, because like you said, like the things he does now, like I think definitely make him a second round guy. Steven touched on it, the passing, the sneaky athleticism, our favorite thing in the draft community. But I was just really impressed with how he defended last year, and there's a lot of search queries that I like to run on Bartorvik to just find patterns for success. And Tubelis comes up on a lot of them already. And like Nathan said, that one thing that's missing is usually either 3-point percentage or true shooting percentage. His numbers go crazy in just about every other area right now. He just needs to hit that shot more consistently. I was disappointed because I thought he was going to do it last season and he didn't. But everything else in his game is just so polished. And I think that we just underappreciate the fact that this guy's 6'11".
Yeah,
he's always been the
massive.
4. He's always been the 4, but he is so big that I think if we can see him at the 5, I think it would really just further drill into people's head how skilled this guy is. And again, just give people an appreciation for the fact that this guy does not do poorly when he's switched out. I just really like his game. Steven just nail on the head. I agree with every single thing that he said about him. I really like his feet. And I think that if we get to see him prolong minutes at the 5, it's just going to really pop for people.
If Kentucky can play Nate Sestina at the 5 and win games, Arizona can play freaking Tubelis at the 5.
Yeah.
That's my argument for that. We talked about sneaky athleticism with Tubelis, our last guy that we're hitting on tonight. There is nothing sneaky about his athleticism. Jacob Toppin is a monster athletically, 6'9", 205 pounds. Listen, again, nothing sexy about the counting stats. 56% though from the field, 40% from 3-point range, 75% from the line. All right. You have me interested. A 60.3 true shooting percentage. We know he can be a defensive playmaker as well. Some of the blocks that this man can get are absolutely ridiculous. Steven, given that a lot of his offense, especially his shooting, was on low volume, what kind of a leap can Toppin make with more opportunity? And how much better can he get on defense, particularly as a help defender and weak side shot blocker? Because I think if those two things come together, it can be the perfect storm of somebody who a lot of people have forgotten about because he's an older player now. He's a senior at Kentucky, so it's not like he's only a sophomore coming around like Damian Collins. We just want to see more opportunity from him. No, Jacob's older with much more expectations, in my opinion, on this Kentucky team. There's Cason Wallace, there's Chris Livingston, there's Oscar Tshiebwe, there's some of the other guys who we know about, but really, if this team's going to get to where they want to go, which is a Final Four or a championship game, I think Jacob Toppin has to make a leap. Corey believes he's going to make a leap. I think some of the other guys in No Ceilings think the leap is possible. I'm also going to buy into the leap. I'm not going to say this guy can get up the first round conversation, but if you're telling me he's like a sneaky top 45 guy at some point, it would not surprise me because of the talent that I do think is in there. The opportunity is probably going to finally intersect for him at the right time. So what do you think about Jacob Toppin?
I think I'm more in line with you, Nathan, to where if he does climb up boards, it's probably more in that like 45-ish range. Like I don't have a second round grade on him right now. Because
which is fine. He has to prove things to some people. Absolutely.
Right. And he's in the sleeper range, right? So listen, athleticism there. He's primarily going to be a lob threat, right? He's a willing screener, which I like a lot. That he commits to setting a good screen, right? And he moves pretty well off the ball too, for being a forward, right? I think though what really could help him is if I trusted him to put the ball on the ground really much at all. Like that really hurts his grade for me. Which if you can't drive or attack whenever, if all you're doing is being on an island on the corner offensively as a shooter or being a lob threat, you're easily negated, as an NBA player, right? So in the perimeter defense, like him being able to switch out, I'm less concerned about the help defense as I am in him being in like in a man-to-man situation and being asked to switch out onto a guard. Like that's the defensive concern that I have, because I think help side is going to be there. I'm interested to see how he and Livingston kind of coexist as like the forwards on this team, with Oscar Tshiebwe going to undoubtedly be camped out somewhere around the basket. Those two, I think, are going to rely a lot on each other, probably more than a lot of people are anticipating. I think some people are looking at like the Wallace or the Wheeler marriage with Toppin. I think it's really going to be how do he and Livingston coexist and play off of each other.
Maxwell, we've already seen Toppin in action during the preseason, right? Like some of their overseas runs. He was hitting outside shots. He was hitting perimeter shots. He was very active on the offensive end. He was making those plays on defense. Like he looked like the guy who knew that he arrived and he's ready to take over more of the mantle for Kentucky. So are you buying into what we've seen in some of the preseason tape, or are you more so, no, you kind of believe who we saw in his junior season is who he's going to be? He's got to prove it to me more.
Yeah, I think I'm like somewhere in between. Like I'm definitely way more excited and definitely will have closer eyes on him going into the season because of what he did in these preseason games. And then going back in the film, it's like, yeah, there's a lot of really positive stuff there. It's the similarities with him and Obi are that they are both very good end to end. They're both above the rim finishers, really powerful 2-footed leapers with good body control at the rim. I think some of the stuff I like a little bit better about him is I think he's like, I put like fairly comfortable switching down. Like, it's not like, oh man, he's got a guard. I feel great about it, but it's like, he's okay if he switched on to somebody smaller than him. That's got some quickness. I like some of his passing angles. I think he's a little bit more creative than I'd realized during the season. Steven mentioned the handle. And like, that is like where I get really nervous with him, is that and the willingness to take threes. It's like he was hitting him in the preseason, but last year he took like barely over 1 3 per 100 possessions. And that wasn't a team where like he was parked behind the 3-point line quite a bit. It wasn't like, oh, well, they just had him under the basket. Like that wasn't necessarily the role. Like he could have taken more threes if he felt up to it, and he didn't. And then he had a handle. Like, I am just not crazy about him putting the ball on the ground. And when you think about like some of the things he does, like his speed, his athleticism, I'm not like crazy about his passing. Like, I don't think he's, Jokic or anything, but he's a pretty capable passer. Things like a handoff situation where he can, maybe burn the guy if he comes up too close to him and get to the basket. If his handle is iffy and he's in the half court, like that kind of stuff, then it's not there for him at the NBA level. So I want to see him be a lot more careful and on top of his dribble. And I want to just see him be willing to take those threes.
So that's going to do it for this episode of the podcast. We touched on a lot more names. The number of prospects we continue to cover on these podcasts amazes me. We're going to be back next week, same time, same place on this feed with, I believe we're going to be doing some G League Ignite as well as Overtime Elite conversation. Now that I've been down to Atlanta, the facilities, Steven will have been down there by that time. So we're going to have some interesting notes about our trips and our takes on that program, as well as the Scoot Hendersons of the world. And we're going to have all those fun. It's finally time for us to talk about Victor Wembanyama and Scoot Henderson over the following 2 podcasts. So I can't wait for that conversation. But in the meantime, thank you all for listening to this episode of the No Ceilings NBA podcast. I guess I have to say that now. Draft Deeper, part of the feed. We're finally here. But you can find me on Twitter at Draft Deeper. You can find Maxwell Baumbach on Twitter at Boundboards. And you can find Steven on Twitter at Steven G Hoops. We all are going to have plenty cooking for No Ceilings over the coming weeks. I think the majority of what we're releasing for our start is going to be a lot of group pieces. We're going to have all of our conference previews out. We're going to come together for a big board some point soon, as well as a preseason mock draft. So keep your eyes out for all of that content. I do have a column that's going up the same day this podcast is coming out, a 5,100 word banger on what I saw at Overtime Elite. So definitely make sure you're locked into NoCeilingsNBA.com, that you're subscribed to make sure that you're reading all of my thoughts and getting some insight on what I think about the Overtime program and the prospects that I saw as a whole. So thank you all again for listening. Until we meet again next week, I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your week.